Dreamtime history for sleep.
A lavish feast, a gilded wooden chest, and 72 conspirators, including the Queen of Ethiopia, all waiting in silence. As Osiris steps into the ornate box as part of a game, the lid slams shut, sealing him inside. What began as a joyous celebration becomes a burial at sea, casting Egypt's beloved ruler into the depths of the Nile and plunging the kingdom into mourning. Years before that fateful feast, in the quiet of a Theban marketplace, a humble man named Pames felt the words of a prophecy fall from his lips like water from a cracked jar. He had been a seller of linen, known for his honest measure and quiet demeanor. But on that day, his voice carried the weight of an unseen authority. He spoke of a golden age coming to Egypt, led by a king whose heart would beat in rhythm with the Nile's own pulse. The divine choice had already been made. Ra's selection of Osiris was not a quiet matter of succession. It was marked by the bestowal of the Atef crown, a headpiece woven from reeds and feathers, topped with 2 curling ostrich plumes and 2 solar discs. This was not merely a crown of rule, but a crown of transformation, signifying a kingship that would fundamentally alter Egypt's relationship with the land and the gods. It was a declaration that the old methods of power, based on sheer force and tribal loyalty, were ending. This divine appointment created an immediate and profound tension. A significant faction within the nobility and even among the priesthood viewed the change as a dangerous departure from tradition. They were men whose power was rooted in the old warrior codes, in the seasonal raids and the stark hierarchies that had defined Upper Egypt for generations. To them, Ra's choice felt less like a blessing and more like a celestial dismissal of their entire way of life. Osiris's early reign fulfilled the prophecy with startling speed. He systematically ended the savage practices of ritual combat and human tribute that had long been used to control the populace. In their place, he introduced the plough and the shaduf, turning the Nile's seasonal anger into a predictable source of life. He brought copper tools from the eastern mines, replacing brittle flint and weak wood, enabling farmers to dig deeper irrigation canals and build stronger granaries. His vision, however, refused to be contained by the traditional 2 lands. He opened diplomatic channels with the peoples of Nubia and Libya, and even established trade routes that reached across the Great Green Sea. He invited foreign scholars to Memphis and Thebes to share their knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and stoneworking. This cosmopolitan approach earned Egypt unprecedented wealth and admiration from its neighbors, but it also cultivated a deep, seething resentment at home. Within the royal court, this new philosophy was perceived as a direct threat to the established power structure. The old guard saw their influence diminishing, their counsel ignored in favor of foreign advisors and progressive thinkers. Their authority, once derived from controlling scarce resources and localized conflict, was being systematically replaced by a centralized state focused on abundance and universal order. The stage was thus intrinsically set for a fundamental conflict, a clash between the forces of a new enlightenment and the entrenched established order. The very innovations that brought unparalleled prosperity, the agricultural surplus that fed the cities, the copper that built the monuments, the international alliances that secured the borders, also created the conditions for his downfall. This immense progress made the kingdom powerful, but it also made Osiris a target, isolating him from the traditional sources of power that felt most threatened by his success. This foundational schism, this silent civil war between the past and the future, is what made Set's later conspiracy not just possible but almost inevitable, providing him with a ready chorus of elite supporters who felt they had everything to lose. Set's envy did not emerge as a sudden emotion, but as a quiet and methodical force, nurtured in the shadows cast by his brother's luminous reign. While Osiris taught agriculture and introduced writing and law, Set observed, his resentment solidifying into strategy. He began identifying those whom Osiris' new order had pushed to the margins: local chieftains displaced by centralized governance, priests of old cults whose rituals were de-emphasized, and military leaders who found their skills in raiding and enforcement suddenly obsolete in a time of peace and cultivation. These individuals, though Egyptian, felt their traditional sources of honor and authority dissolving under a king who valued the plow over the spear. His recruitment extended beyond the Nile Valley. The Queen of Ethiopia, representing a significant external power to the south, became a crucial ally. Her inclusion signals a complex geopolitical landscape where neighboring rulers viewed Egypt's expanding influence and progressive policies with deep suspicion. They saw Osiris' cosmopolitan vision not as enlightenment, but as a threat to their own autonomy and traditional ways, making them willing participants in a plot to destabilize the region's dominant power. This alliance transformed a domestic grievance into an international conspiracy. The number of conspirators was itself a deliberate calculation. 72 represented more than a simple tally. It signified a complete and overwhelming opposition, a number large enough to imply broad discontent, yet manageable enough to maintain secrecy. It symbolized the totality of chaos actively arrayed against the established divine order. A coalition of internal and external forces united by a common fear of Osiris's transformative reign. The ornate chest was the physical centerpiece of the plot, a piece of craftsmanship designed for a single morbid purpose. Its dimensions were precisely measured to fit only Osiris's unique stature, ensuring it would serve as an inescapable prison. To disguise its function, Set's artisans covered it in bright paint and meticulous gold leaf, transforming a funerary box into a dazzling prize, its beautiful exterior a perfect lie masking its hollow, deadly interior. The feast provided the necessary backdrop for this deception. It was orchestrated to lower all guards through an atmosphere of celebration, music, and generous amounts of wine. Under this veil of conviviality, Set presented the chest as part of a game, a challenge for the guests to see who might fit inside such a finely made object. The other conspirators took their turns, each feigning a failed attempt, their performances a carefully rehearsed pantomime of light-hearted competition. This game of fitting into the chest was the final masterful layer of psychological manipulation. It presented a deadly serious intent as mere entertainment, a public test of fortune. When Osiris, suspecting nothing, laid down inside the perfect confines of the box, the game ended. The lid was slammed shut, sealed with lead, and the celebration instantly became an execution. The answer to how Set orchestrated this murder lies in this meticulous planning where every element, the number of allies, the crafted object, the social setting, served both a practical function in the plot and a deeper symbolic purpose, turning a royal feast into a carefully staged tomb. The great Nile, in one deliberate moment, transformed from its sacred purpose as the giver of life to serve as a sealed coffin. The conspirators cast the chest into the water, entrusting the river's power to carry it away from Thebes and toward the distant Mediterranean Sea. Its natural flow, which normally brought fertile silt and predictable abundance, became an unwitting agent in the royal disappearance. The chest rode the current like a seed carried on the wind, though this seed would not sprout. Egypt's primary source of sustenance, the very artery of its civilization, now concealed the body of its missing king. The river that fed the wheat and barley fields, that filled the irrigation canals Osiris himself had expanded, became the vessel of his entombment. The conspirators relied on the Nile's immense, indifferent power to perform the final act of their crime. counting on its vastness and relentless seaward journey to make recovery an almost impossible task. They understood the river would swallow all evidence. The chest was more than a prison. It was a burial shroud crafted to remain forever closed. Its lead seals and sturdy construction were designed to withstand the water's pressure and the passage of time, ensuring Osiris would not be found. This method of disposal allowed the murderers to avoid direct bloodshed, creating a technical separation between themselves and the physical act of killing. It was a murder performed by proxy, using the environment itself as the weapon. There was a profound and intentional irony in using the Nile for this purpose. Its sacred status, which should have offered protection to the divine king, instead provided a perverse layer of safety for the perpetrators. By making the river their accomplice, they invoked a sense of natural inevitability, as if the event were a tragic accident of nature rather than a calculated act of fratricide. This was a deliberate manipulation of religious belief for cynical ends. The water burial also served as the ultimate act of disrespect toward Osiris's solar-oriented nature. As a deity of vegetation, rebirth, and the fertile land, his essence was tied to the sun-warmed earth and the orderly cycle of the seasons. To consign him to the dark, hidden depths of the flowing Nile was a symbolic victory for chaos, a forceful rejection of everything his reign represented. It placed him in the elemental opposite of his divine domain. The river that had been the foundation of his agricultural revolution, the instrument through which he gifted Egypt with abundance and lifted it from tribal conflict, became his grave. This final twist completed the subversion of his benevolent reign. The source of the kingdom's prosperity was perverted into the mechanism of its king's removal, a stark illustration of how the tools of creation can be turned toward destruction. The Nile, the great life-giver, was forced to play the role of the silent executioner. Isis observed 72 days of mourning, a precise mirror to the 72 conspirators who had executed the plot. This was not a random period of sorrow, but a complete ritual cycle, a span of time that allowed the initial, overwhelming shock to gradually crystallize into something far more potent, a state of determined forensic investigation. Her grief did not fade, it transformed, its heat forging a new resolve, its weight providing the ballast for careful, deliberate action. She understood that raw emotion alone would not find her husband. It needed to be directed, focused, and applied with the precision of a craft. She began a methodical process, starting with the scene of the crime. She sought out every guest who had attended the feast, from the highest noble to the most junior wine server. She approached each not as a grieving queen demanding answers, but as an investigator gathering testimony. Her questions were specific, aimed at reconstructing the sequence of events with granular detail. Who had spoken to whom? Where had people been standing? What had they seen? And crucially, what had they heard? She listened for inconsistencies, for nervous glances, for the small telling details that might reveal a hidden truth. Each account provided a small, fragmented piece of the larger picture. One servant recalled the unusual weight of the chest as it was carried out. A minor noble, feeling guilty, hesitantly mentioned a whispered conversation between Set and the Ethiopian envoy he had previously dismissed. A guard posted at the river's edge described the specific angle at which the conspirators had heaved the object into the current. None of these details were conclusive on their own, but when assembled, they formed a trail. She was tracking the chest's journey downriver, not through magic alone, but through the accumulated observations of mortal witnesses, piecing together its path like a cartographer charting a hidden coastline. This search required a dual approach, a constant interplay between her divine intuition and the gritty reality of mortal detective work. Her goddess nature allowed her to sense the lingering traces of divine energy, the psychic imprint of the terrible act. But it was the physical evidence, The testimony of a boatman who saw a strange object caught in the reeds, the report of a farmer who noticed disturbed mud on a remote bank, that gave these intuitions a tangible form and a geographical direction. She learned to trust both the whisper of the divine and the stubborn facts of the mundane world. The transformation from a figure of pure grief to a master investigator was now complete. She had channeled the vast, destructive power of her sorrow into the narrow, productive channel of systematic action. She recognized that effective pursuit required this synthesis. Passion provided the motive force, but only meticulous logic could provide the map. The first true breakthrough in this new phase came not from a vision or a divine sign, but from a human witness. A fisherman, mending his nets near a delta tributary, approached her camp. He spoke of a night several weeks prior, of seeing a group of men, not local to his village, dragging a large, heavy object from the water. He described its shape, its strange, gilded appearance even in the moonlight, and the direction they had taken it. This was the transition point, the moment the search shifted from a general downriver sweep to a targeted, active pursuit of a specific lead. The silent, passive period of mourning was over. The hunt had truly begun. The trail of eyewitness accounts and subtle signs led Isis north, following the Mediterranean coast to the ancient cedar-rich city of Byblos. This was not a foreign land in the modern sense, but a place deeply intertwined with Egypt through centuries of trade, cultural exchange, and shared religious concepts. Her investigation had narrowed the search to the royal palace itself, where a remarkable and unforeseen transformation had occurred. The wooden chest, having drifted on the Nile and then the sea, had washed ashore and been discovered by local workers. Unaware of its grim contents, they presented the beautifully crafted object to their queen, Athis. Seeing the fine workmanship and the unusual gilded decoration, she ordered it hollowed out and incorporated as the central pillar of a new wing of the palace. The fragrant cedar, prized throughout the Mediterranean for its durability and sacred aroma, now encased the chest, making the pillar both a structural support and an ornate decorative feature. It was an unknowing entombment within a place of power. The divine essence emanating from Osiris's body, combined with the residual life force of the Nile waters that had saturated the wood, began to produce a miraculous effect. The prince, a child of Queen Athis, had been suffering from a wasting illness that local physicians and rituals could not cure. Yet since the pillar's installation in the palace, the child's health had begun to steadily and inexplicably improve. His strength returned, his color came back, and he was soon restored to full health. The palace regarded this not as a medical recovery, but as a divine miracle, attributing the healing power to the sacred cedar pillar itself. Isis, upon her arrival, immediately recognized the potent supernatural properties radiating from the structure. She perceived the familiar divine essence of her husband, now merged with the aromatic power of the cedar and the residual magic of the Nile. The wood had acted as a preserver, maintaining the integrity of the body within, while simultaneously acting as a conduit for its latent, benevolent power to heal the living. This created a complex and delicate situation. Understanding that a direct demand for the pillar would be met with confusion and refusal, given its new sacred status, Isis chose a path of discretion. She approached the royal household, not as an Egyptian goddess, but disguised as a humble nursemaid seeking employment. This guise granted her direct access to the palace interiors, and most importantly, allowed her to observe the prince and the pillar at close range without raising suspicion. She could study the dynamics of the court and witness firsthand the deep reverence the household held for this object that had saved the heir. She observed how the family and servants treated the pillar not as simple architecture, but as a shrine, often leaving small offerings or whispering prayers near its base. This paradox meant that a forceful reclamation was impossible. It would be seen as a sacrilegious attack on the source of the prince's salvation and would destroy the very body she sought to recover. The recovery would require not power, but a careful and empathetic negotiation, an exchange built on understanding the value the pillar held for the Queen of Byblos. Isis's choice of disguise as a nursemaid was a strategic decision serving multiple critical functions. It allowed her immediate and unquestioned access to the private quarters of the palace, placing her in the room with both the cedar pillar and the ailing prince. She could observe the object and its effects on the household intimately, gauging the level of reverence it commanded while performing her duties. This role provided a perfect cover for gathering intelligence and assessing the emotional and political landscape without revealing her identity or her true objective to anyone, including Set's potential spies. Within this role, she began to demonstrate her abilities. Her healing techniques for the prince were subtle, yet profoundly effective. Methods that drew upon her divine knowledge of herbs, incantations, and the flow of life force. She did not declare herself a goddess or perform showy miracles. Instead, she revealed her power through results. The child's health improved steadily and dramatically under her care, a recovery so complete and inexplicable that it could only point to a supernatural intervention. This display of power was a form of quiet communication. Queen Isfet, witnessing the miraculous restoration of her son, began to understand that the humble woman in her employ possessed extraordinary, otherworldly power. This recognition was not based on a formal declaration, but on the undeniable evidence before her eyes. The dynamic between them shifted from that of a monarch and a servant to something far more complex, a relationship teetering between human gratitude and divine awe. The queen now sensed she was in the presence of a force beyond ordinary comprehension. The negotiation for the pillar proceeded through this unspoken understanding, a dialogue conducted in glances, gestures, and the shared experience of the child's healing. There were no formal diplomatic envoys or written treaties. Isis, through her actions, had demonstrated what she could offer: the complete and guaranteed health of the heir to the throne. The implied request, hanging unspoken in the air, was for the object contained within the fragrant cedar wood. The negotiation hinged on this silent exchange of value. This exchange balanced two profound and desperate emotional needs against one another. On one side was Queen Isfet's raw, maternal desperation to secure her child's future, a force that would compel a ruler to grant almost any request. On the other was Isis's all-consuming wifely devotion, a drive to recover her husband's body that had sustained a long and perilous search. Both women were operating from positions of deep vulnerability, which created a unique bridge of empathy between them, transcending their different cultures and stations. The agreement itself was sealed not with vows or signed documents, but through the fulfillment of actions. Isis completed the healing of the prince, restoring him to full and vibrant health. In response, Queen Isfet, acknowledging the debt and understanding the deeper significance of the request, willingly ordered the pillar to be given to the nursemaid. The cedar was carefully cut from the palace structure, and the chest within was extracted. This cross-cultural exchange demonstrated how powerful devotions, maternal and wifely, could circumvent normal political protocols, creating a resolution based on mutual need and respect, rather than power or threat. The transaction was complete, and Isis could begin the journey back to Egypt with her husband's body. Set's initial confidence in the success of his scheme began to erode the moment his network of spies delivered their first unsettling report. They had tracked Isis's movements north, confirming she had left Egypt entirely, her path leading directly toward the coastal city of Byblos. This information acted as a cold shock to his system. His satisfaction over the perfect murder dissolved into a gnawing anxiety, prompting a shift from casual oversight to an obsessive, almost frantic level of monitoring. He understood, with a clarity that chilled him, that his brother's body had not been lost to the river after all, and that Isis's singular devotion presented the only plausible threat to his new and precarious rule. The possibility of Osiris's return began to dominate his thoughts, invading even his dreams. He saw visions of the chest being opened, of his brother walking once more in the sun, of his own hard-won power crumbling to dust. This was not a vague political worry, but a specific, magical terror. He comprehended the principles of Egyptian resurrection rites. He knew that a complete and properly preserved body could, in the hands of a skilled practitioner like Isis, be a vessel for the return of the Ka, the life force. His original plan of a water burial, which he had believed was so final, now seemed dangerously inadequate, a temporary solution that was on the verge of catastrophic failure. In response, he dramatically intensified his surveillance apparatus, focusing particularly on all activities across the Nile Delta. This region, with its vast network of tributaries and its proximity to the Mediterranean, was the most logical point of re-entry for anyone returning from Byblos by sea. He ordered his agents to watch the ports, to question every foreign trader, and to monitor any unusual activity along the riverbanks. Every whisper, every rumor of a strange artifact or a clandestine landing was to be reported directly to him. His court, which he had once ruled with a veneer of assured power, now functioned under the constant tension of his paranoia. This pervasive fear soon manifested in a decision for extreme, preventative measures. Convinced that mere distance was no longer a sufficient safeguard, he resolved that the physical integrity of Osiris's body itself had to be destroyed. He concluded that only through systematic dismemberment could he achieve a level of security that the river could not provide. This was a deliberate escalation born from his deep, if twisted, understanding of magical theory. He sought not just to hide the body, but to render its reassembly magically impossible, to scatter the pieces so widely and symbolically that no amount of devotion could ever piece them back together. His actions, intended as the ultimate insurance policy, were in reality the genesis of the very crisis he hoped to prevent. By violating the body so completely, he transformed Isis's quest from a simple recovery mission into an epic, nation-spanning odyssey of reconstruction. He created the geographical puzzle that would demand all of her skill and perseverance to solve. In his desperate attempt to secure his reign by erasing his brother, he instead authored the precise conditions that would guarantee his own eventual downfall, setting in motion a chain of events that would elevate Osiris to an eternal underworld kingship and inspire a legacy far more powerful and enduring than any temporal rule. Seti's selection of 14 parts for the dismemberment was a deeply calculated decision rooted in magical doctrine, not an arbitrary act of savagery. The number 14 held potent cosmological significance, potentially aligning with the lunar cycle's two distinct 14-day phases of waxing and waning. By mapping this celestial rhythm onto the division of the body, Set amplified the ritual's power, attempting to bind his brother's essence to a cycle of perpetual incompleteness and decay, making resurrection an astronomical as well as a physical impossibility. This connection to the moon further contrasted Osiris's solar nature, a symbolic rejection of his core identity. The scattering of these pieces across the length of Egypt transformed the nation into a vast and intricate geographical puzzle. Each location was chosen with deliberate symbolic intent, representing a different facet of the Egyptian divine landscape and cosmology. A part might be left at a remote oasis sacred to a minor desert deity, another cast into the marshes of the delta associated with primordial creation, a third concealed near a mining region linked to the Earth's subterranean power. This was not simple disposal. It was an act of profound spiritual cartography, forcing any who sought reassembly to undertake a pilgrimage through the entire sacred and profane geography of the two lands. The act itself required specialized knowledge. Set employed priests who were not merely loyalists, but experts in a dark and precise branch of anti-resurrection magic. They understood the formulae, the incantations, and the ritual gestures necessary to sever the spiritual connections between the parts, to imbue each piece with a protective aura that would repel reassembly spells. The dismemberment was performed with the cold precision of a surgical procedure, following ancient and forbidden texts that detailed how to permanently sunder a divine being's connection to the physical world. This was spiritual warfare waged with scalpels and spells. In this meticulously planned destruction, the phallus was singled out for particular attention, its recovery anticipated to be the most difficult. Its symbolic importance as the source of generative power and dynastic continuity made it a primary target for obliteration. The method of its loss, being consumed by a creature of the Nile, was likely part of the ritual, an act designed to remove it utterly from the realm of potential recovery, assimilating it back into the chaotic, uncontrolled forces of nature that Set championed. Its absence would present the ultimate test for any attempt at restoration. This systematic fragmentation served as the ultimate expression of Set's philosophy. It was a physical manifestation of Isfet, chaos, disorder, and dissolution, overwhelming Maat, the divine order that Osiris represented. By shattering the unified body of the king and scattering its components to the winds, Set sought to demonstrate that his chaotic reign was now the fundamental reality of Egypt. The body of the state, like the body of its god, was to be broken and divided, its former wholeness nothing but a memory. This act was intended as a final, undeniable victory, a statement written not on papyrus, but on the very land and flesh of the kingdom itself. The completeness of the opposition, the 14 pieces arrayed against the one, was meant to be an unconquerable equation, a perfect prison from which there could be no escape. It was at this lowest point in the search, facing the task of locating 14 scattered pieces across the vastness of Egypt, that Isis received a crucial and strategic alliance. Nephthys, the sister of both Isis and Osiris, and the wife of Set, chose to cross a profound and dangerous divide. Her decision to join the search was not a simple act of familial sympathy, but a complex realignment of divine forces, bringing with her an essential and specialized knowledge base that Isis alone could not access. She arrived not merely as a grieving relative, but as a master of funerary rites and underworld navigation, a professional embalmer whose expertise would prove fundamental to the mission's success. Her involvement provided an immediate and necessary balance to Isis's approach. Where Isis's power was fundamentally solar and life-giving, radiant and direct, Nephtys's understanding was rooted in the earth and the shadowy realms beyond. She possessed intricate knowledge of the rituals required to navigate the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and the precise ceremonies needed to prepare a body for its journey through that perilous landscape. This wasn't just spiritual knowledge. It was a practical, technical skill set for dealing with the dead, a complement to Isis's abilities that created a more complete and formidable operational capability. Nephthys's contribution was also deeply psychological and strategic. Her intimate, difficult relationship with Set granted her an unparalleled window into his mind. She understood his patterns of thought, his motivations rooted in envy and a craving for validation, and most importantly, his methods. She could anticipate the kind of symbolic logic he might have employed in choosing the scattering sites, recognizing that his cruel act was likely not random chaos, but a carefully designed ritual of negation. This insight allowed her to help decipher a potential pattern in the madness, turning a seemingly insurmountable task into a solvable, if complex, geographical and spiritual puzzle. Beyond her analytical value, Nephthys provided critical, tangible support. As they traveled the length of Egypt, she invoked powerful protective spells that shielded them from both the natural dangers of the wilderness and the potential magical interference of Set-Es agents. Her presence also lent the entire operation a layer of profound religious legitimacy. As a divine being in her own right, and as the wife of the very god they opposed, her participation signaled that this was not a personal vendetta, but a sacred quest to restore Maat, the cosmic order that Set had violently disrupted. She operated in this dual capacity throughout, functioning simultaneously as a devoted sister-in-law and a consummate professional. Her hands, skilled in the art of embalming, would be essential for the delicate physical work of reassembly, while her heart, connected by blood and a shared sense of injustice, provided the emotional fortitude to continue. This powerful partnership combined two distinct types of knowledge and power, Isis's radiant magic and Nephthys's chthonic wisdom, creating a unified front that could address the challenge from every necessary angle, from the physical search of the land to the spiritual preparation of the body. Facing the impossible challenge of locating 14 fragments of a body deliberately scattered across the entirety of Egypt, Isis turned to a method that merged divine power with practical problem-solving. She underwent a sacred transformation, her form shifting into that of a huge, soaring bird, a shape that granted her a perspective and capability inaccessible from the ground. This was not a simple physical change, but a deliberate ritual act, requiring specific incantations and a profound realignment of her spiritual essence into this powerful avian vessel. Her bird form appeared to be a composite of Egypt's most revered avian symbols, combining elements that suggested the keen-eyed perception of a falcon, the wide-ranging flight of a vulture, and the intimate connection to the Nile's marshes of an ibis. This fusion created an ideal instrument for her search, a living embodiment of the different types of sight and knowledge she needed to employ. From this elevated vantage point, the landscape of Egypt revealed itself not as a series of isolated locations, but as a vast, interconnected map. The patterns of rivers, deserts, and settlements spread out beneath her wings, allowing her to analyze the land with a cartographer's eye. This aerial perspective offered more than just a broad view. It provided a spiritual dimension to the search. From high above, Isis could perceive subtle magical residues, faint trails of divine energy left by the dismembered parts of her husband. These shimmering traces, utterly invisible to any mortal observer on the ground, acted like a beacon, guiding her flight path across the delta, along the river valley, and into the remote deserts. The height allowed her to perceive the spiritual geography of Set's crime, the invisible wounds his act had inflicted upon the land itself. The survey from the heavens began to reveal a chilling logic behind the scattering. The locations were not chosen at random. They formed a dark constellation across Egypt, with each site selected for its specific symbolic meaning within the country's cosmology. A piece left at a desolate oasis, another near a mining region rich in malachite, a third cast into the papyrus marshes. Each placement was a deliberate act of magical negation, a statement written on the land itself. Seeing this pattern from above was crucial, as it transformed a hopeless search for needles in a haystack into a systematic investigation of a predefined, albeit sinister, design. Each discovery from the air was merely the first step. Locating a glimmer of energy in a specific stretch of river or a remote canyon was followed by a meticulous process of documentation and recovery planning. She would circle the site, memorizing landmarks and assessing potential dangers, logistical challenges, or the presence of Set's human agents. Furthermore, the avian form itself served as a perfect disguise, allowing her to conduct this immense reconnaissance operation in plain sight. To any spy watching from below, she was just another large bird riding the thermals, a common sight that attracted no suspicion. This method brilliantly combined raw magical ability in the form of the transformation and enhanced perception with the disciplined, patient techniques of a field investigator, proving that devotion could be channeled into a highly effective and systematic search strategy. Recognizing that possession of the actual bodily fragments made her profoundly vulnerable to Set's surveillance, Isis implemented a sophisticated strategy of deception. She directed the meticulous creation of wax replicas for each recovered piece of Osiris. These were not crude imitations, but precise ritual objects, each requiring careful crafting and the recitation of specific blessing incantations. The process of fashioning them was itself an act of profound devotion, a methodical, prayerful repetition of the search and discovery, transforming the raw material of wax into sacred vessels charged with protective purpose. The wax was chosen with careful intent for its inherent properties. Its malleability allowed for an exact physical correspondence to the organic forms it replaced, ensuring the replicas could pass a visual inspection. More importantly, its ritual purity within Egyptian ceremonial practice made it a suitable medium for containing and channeling divine energy. As each copy was formed, whispers of ancient spells for protection and concealment were breathed into it, layering the physical object with a subtle field of magical defense designed to deflect the searching magic of Set's priests. These replicas served a crucial dual purpose, operating on both practical and cosmic levels. On the most immediate level, they functioned as sophisticated decoys. Isis had these wax copies buried in separate, carefully chosen locations across Egypt. Local priests were discreetly entrusted with the guardianship of these sites, each group led to believe they were protecting the one true, sacred burial place of their lost king. This created a complex web of false information, a deliberate campaign of misinformation aimed directly at Set's network of spies and informants. On a metaphysical level, this replication strategy was essential for maintaining cosmic balance, or Maat, during the inherently unstable process of reassembly. To gather the dismembered parts of a god was an act that risked attracting chaotic forces and disturbing the spiritual equilibrium. The wax copies served as symbolic placeholders, creating a false but stable narrative of the body's state that appeased the cosmic order. They generated a parallel reality where the recovery was already complete and the body was at rest, thus shielding the actual, ongoing work from supernatural interference. This sophisticated maneuver effectively turned a position of extreme vulnerability into one of strategic advantage. The very act of having recovered the pieces, which made her a target, was now used as the foundation of a masterful deception. By flooding the information landscape with false leads and compelling decoys, she fragmented Set's attention and drained his resources. His agents would be forced to investigate countless rumored burial sites, chasing shadows while the true fragments were kept secure. The creation and distribution of these wax bodies wove a parallel narrative of recovery, a convincing illusion that brought the precious time and secrecy needed for the genuine delicate work of physical and spiritual reconstruction to proceed unimpeded. The involvement of Anubis marked a definitive turning point in the nature of the endeavor. His arrival, from the realm of the Duat, brought a level of technical expertise that was otherwise unattainable. He was the divine embalmer, the guardian of the threshold between life and death, and his presence signaled that this was no longer a personal quest of a grieving widow, but an operation with the full official recognition of the cosmic order. His participation bestowed a sacred legitimacy upon the entire undertaking, elevating it from a desperate search to a sanctioned ritual process. He arrived with tools and techniques that were the exclusive province of the gods of the dead. His instruments for anointing and binding were not of earthly make, and his knowledge of the sacred unguents and resins was absolute. This unique skill set directly balanced the intense magical power being channeled by Isis, grounding the spiritual effort in the meticulous physical and ritualistic requirements necessary for a successful resurrection. His presence ensured that every action taken was not only potent, but also precise, adhering to the ancient protocols that governed such profound transitions. His counsel was immediately practical. He advised on the specific preservation methods required for the extended timeline of the recovery, understanding how to treat each recovered fragment to prevent further decay and to maintain its ritual purity despite the passage of time. This knowledge included complex anti-decay spells and powerful protective wards, which he wove around the gathered pieces. These safeguards were essential to counteract any lingering malevolent magic Set may have left upon the remains, and to protect them from the natural processes of corruption until the final reassembly could begin. He also took on the critical role of coordinator for the final phase. He helped determine the precise timing for the reassembly, understanding that such an act needed to align with specific celestial events and the correct phases of the moon to have the greatest chance of success. His participation connected every aspect of the effort, the physical search, the magical protection, the ritual preparation, to the grand cyclical processes of the cosmos itself, ensuring it was woven into the fabric of divine law. Furthermore, he provided access to the ancient and seldom seen scrolls of resurrection, texts that contained the most profound and guarded secrets of reanimation from the earliest times. These scrolls offered guidance that went beyond the knowledge of even Isis and Nephthys, detailing the exact sequences of incantations and the precise placement of amulets needed within the linen wrappings. This professional, almost clinical involvement was what ultimately elevated the recovery beyond a story of devotion. It transformed it into a collaborative, divinely sanctioned operation, a meticulous process where divine will was executed with the discipline of a master craftsman. Under his guidance, the reassembly became a sacred puzzle, with each piece, each spell, and each ritual gesture fitting together with deliberate purpose, guided by the ancient knowledge he alone possessed in its entirety. The recovery of the 13th fragment presented a distinct set of challenges that surpassed all previous trials. This piece had been deliberately hidden in a location of profound obscurity and layered protection, a site chosen by Set not merely for its physical remoteness, but for its deep, unsettling resonance within the Egyptian spiritual landscape. It was a place where the boundaries between the mundane world and the chthonic realms felt thin and unstable, a nexus of natural and supernatural forces that actively resisted intrusion. Accessing this site demanded more than perseverance. It required a profound act of both physical and spiritual courage. The approach was guarded by the harsh, unforgiving terrain itself, treacherous cliffs, unnavigable thickets, or perhaps a swift, deadly current, making the journey a trial of endurance. More significantly, the location was saturated with a palpable defensive energy, a lingering magical ward placed by Set's priests that sought to instill primal fear, despair, and confusion in any who approached with the intent to reclaim what was hidden there. This was a psychological battlefield as much as a physical one. To complete this extraction, Isis employed specialized tools and techniques developed for this precise, extreme circumstance. These were not the implements of a standard recovery, but ritual objects specifically consecrated for confronting and dismantling powerful protective magic. She might have used a dagger carved from a meteoritic iron to cut through enchantments, or a mirror of polished obsidian to reflect and redirect malignant spiritual energy back upon itself, or an amulet of woven reeds charged with spells of safe passage. Each action was a calculated countermeasure to a specific facet of the site's defenses. The successful retrieval of this piece marked a definitive turning point in the entire quest. It represented a critical mass of recovery, a moment where the sheer weight of accumulated effort began to irrevocably shift the balance of power. It demonstrated in the most concrete terms that a systematic, meticulous effort could methodically dismantle even the most deliberately designed structures of chaos. Each piece successfully brought back to the sacred workspace weakened the overall integrity of Set's magical construct, like removing a series of keystones from a precarious arch. This 13th piece also held a particular symbolic importance beyond its physical form. In the numerology of the ritual, its recovery signaled the near completion of the cycle, the point where the work of destruction was almost entirely undone. It proved that a devotion fueled by love and a disciplined strategic mind could overcome obstacles that were not just accidental or environmental, but were intelligently and maliciously designed to be insurmountable. The reclamation of this fragment was a quiet, powerful testament to the idea that no act of negation, no matter how thorough or cruel, is ever truly final when met with an equal and opposite force of determined reconstruction. The final obstacle, the missing 14th piece, now stood as the last testament to Set's fading power. The missing phallus, or fuss, posed an existential challenge to the entire resurrection effort, threatening to render the reassembly incomplete on both a physical and a sacred level. In Egyptian religious understanding, every part of the body was essential for the soul's journey and its potential for a full return to existence. Its permanent loss meant that Osiris could not be made whole through conventional means, presenting a problem that demanded a solution far beyond a simple physical search. This was not a matter of finding a misplaced object, but of confronting a void that risked invalidating all the painstaking work of recovery. Faced with this absolute absence, Isis turned to a practice of extraordinary magical innovation, choosing to craft a replacement from wax. This decision was grounded in a known ritual tradition where wax was used to create symbolic effigies and representations in funerary rites. But the application here was unprecedented in its scope and significance. The process of forming the substitute drew deeply upon the most ancient creation myths, those which spoke of the gods forming the first beings from inert matter through the power of divine utterance and intention. This was not mere imitation, but a ceremonial reenactment of the original formation of life itself. The new fuss was far more than a shaped piece of wax. It became a vessel for concentrated divine intention, meticulously imbued with the essence of life through sacred incantations and the focused will of the goddess. The material was infused with essences gathered from multiple potent sources, likely including sacred oils, resins from trees associated with creation myths, and perhaps even water from the primordial Nun, the chaotic waters from which all life emerged. This combination transformed the wax from a simple material into a magically charged substitute, a focal point for the spiritual energy required to complete Osiris's being. This ingenious solution beautifully balanced a stark practical necessity with a profound spiritual truth. It acknowledged the irreversible physical loss, while simultaneously affirming that the essence of what was lost could be restored through devotion and correct ritual action. The wax fus served as a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds, a testament to the idea that completeness is not solely dependent on the original physical form, but can be achieved through symbolic act and sacred will. The creation of the replacement demonstrated a remarkable adaptability within the Egyptian religious tradition. It showed that the rituals and beliefs were not a rigid set of immutable laws, but a living, evolving system capable of addressing unforeseen and catastrophic circumstances. This was not a break from tradition, but an expansion of it, an application of ancient principles to a novel and dire problem. It proved that the framework of their spirituality contained within it the tools for its own repair and regeneration. Ultimately, this act of magical innovation revealed how profound devotion could actively create new solutions where none seemed to exist. It was a testament to a love and a determination so powerful that it could not be stopped by even the most final and violating act of destruction. The crafted fuss stood as a symbol of that defiant creativity, a declaration that loss is not necessarily permanent, and that through focused intention and deep understanding of cosmic principles, even the most essential elements of life and identity can be ritually restored and made whole again. With the 14 parts finally gathered, the linen bandages were brought forward to perform their essential function. The linen was not merely a covering, but a vital element in the process of reassembly, serving both practical and deeply symbolic purposes. The fabric created a clean, ritually pure container that would hold the fragments together physically, while its very nature, derived from the flax plant, nurtured by the Nile, connected the reborn god to the cyclical processes of growth, harvest, and renewal that defined the land he ruled. It would bind him back into the natural world from which he had been torn. The wrapping process itself followed a precise and ancient ritual pattern, a sequence of movements and incantations known to Anubis and Nephthys. Each strip of linen was laid upon the body with a specific intention, its placement and the number of layers applied according to a sacred geometry that mirrored the constellations or the passages of the Duat. This was not a simple bandaging, but a methodical reconstruction, a three-dimensional puzzle where every fold and tuck had meaning, every knot served to anchor a specific spiritual energy to the physical form. Embedded within the layers of cloth were spells of integration and healing whispered onto the linen as it was wound. These were not general blessings, but targeted invocations, each one designed to reconnect severed nerves, reknit fractured bone, and seamlessly join the boundaries between the organic flesh and the crafted wax replacement. The spells worked to erase the memory of the violence, to convince the body on a cellular level that it had always been whole, that the trauma of dismemberment was merely a forgotten dream from which it was now awakening. The linen also provided a crucial layer of protection during the dangerous reactivation of the body's spiritual and physical systems. As the final incantations were spoken and the life force began to flow back into the form, the bandages acted as a buffer, containing and focusing the immense energies involved. They shielded the nascent consciousness from external spiritual interference and prevented the raw, unintegrated power from causing a dangerous feedback loop or attracting chaotic entities drawn to such a potent convergence of forces. This entire act of wrapping powerfully mirrored two fundamental human processes. In its methodical, respectful containment of the body, it recalled the practice of mummification, the preparation for a journey into the afterlife. Yet in its intent to create a new, viable form from separate elements, it also evoked the imagery of birth, of a child being swaddled for its first journey into the world. The linen was both a shroud and a swaddling cloth, acknowledging the death that had occurred while simultaneously facilitating a new beginning. This physical act of containment was what made the spiritual reconnection possible. By creating a stable, integrated physical vessel, the linen wrapping provided a secure anchor for the returning K and Ba, the life force and soul of Osiris. It gave these spiritual components a defined and coherent home to return to, a body that was now presented not as a collection of damaged parts, but as a complete and prepared entity awaiting its essential spark. The entire reassembly occurred within a space that had been meticulously prepared and consecrated for this purpose. The area was purified with water from the Nile and natron salt, its boundaries marked with protective symbols drawn in the earth. Incense burned to create a barrier against malevolent forces, and the air was thick with the low chant of the participants, creating a bubble of sacred space where the normal laws of nature could be temporarily suspended for this miraculous work. The process required the fully coordinated effort of all three divine participants, each performing their distinct role in a silent, practiced harmony. Isis channeled the immense power of her devotion and her magical authority to call the spirit home. Nephthys applied her knowledge of funerary rites and protection spells, ensuring the stability of the process. Anubis, with his unerring expertise, directed the physical placement of the bandages and the amulets tucked within them, his hands performing the work they were divinely designed to do. It was a trinity of purpose, a collaboration of different types of power focused on a single, profound goal. Through this layered ritualistic wrapping, they were not merely restoring the old body of Osiris, they were actively creating a new body for a new existence. The form that emerged from the linen was whole, but it was a wholeness born from fracture and repair, a body that would forever carry the memory of its own reconstruction in its very substance. It was prepared not for a return to the sunlit world of the living, but for the different realities of the underworld. This intensive physical preparation was the essential foundation that made the subsequent spiritual transformation not only possible, but sustainable. The careful, ritualistic binding of the body provided the stable vessel necessary to contain the vastly different kind of life that was to be granted to Osiris. The linen held the form together, allowing the spirit to settle into its new old home, and marking the completion of the physical labor so the metaphysical change could properly begin. The resurrection of Osiris was not a return to what was, but an emergence into something entirely new, a transformation born of irreversible change. His restoration to life recognized that the fundamental violation of his dismemberment could not be simply undone or erased by any ritual, no matter how powerful. The divine essence that now animated his reassembled form was forever marked by the profound experience of death, fragmentation, and the long journey back to coherence. This altered state of being meant a full return to his former life as a living king of the fertile land was an impossibility. His existence had been irrevocably moved onto a different plane. His transition to the role of ruler of the Duat, the underworld, was a direct utilization of the hard-won, unique experience his ordeal had granted him. No other deity could claim his intimate understanding of the complete cycle, from a vibrant earthly life through a traumatic and fragmented death to a painstakingly reconstructed afterlife. This perspective made him the ideal governor for the realm of the dead, an administrator who could apply the principles of order and justice he had established in Egypt to the complexities of the spirit world. He brought to this new role a level of empathy and comprehension that was entirely born from his own suffering. The process of this final transformation answers the question of how a resurrection ritual can create a new destiny rather than restore an old one. It functions through a profound acceptance that some experiences fundamentally alter one's nature and purpose. The rituals performed by Isis and Anubis did not seek to pretend the dismemberment never happened. Instead, they integrated its reality into a new, stable form of existence. The outcome was not a reversal, but an evolution, a maturation of purpose that took the trauma and repurposed it into a tool for governance. This new position allowed him to leverage his dual understanding of life and death in a way that perfectly balanced cosmic justice with deep compassion. Having felt the bite of injustice and chaos so personally, he could adjudicate the souls of the deceased with a fairness tempered by mercy, understanding their fears, their regrets, and their hopes from a place of shared experience. His judgments were not delivered from an untouchable, distant throne, but from a seat of hard-earned wisdom. This appointment directly addressed the profound cosmic imbalance that Set's chaotic actions had inflicted upon the world. Where Set had introduced fragmentation and disorder, Osiris's stable, just rule over the afterlife established a new, permanent counterweight, a bulwark against entropy that ensured the cycle of death and renewal would proceed with purpose and structure. His underworld kingdom required a different set of qualities than earthly rule, focusing less on cultivation and diplomacy and more on guidance, judgment, and the maintenance of eternal spiritual equilibrium. For Osiris himself, this resolution provided deeply meaningful work after immense trauma. It was a purpose that acknowledged what he had endured while giving that experience a productive outlet, transforming a narrative of victimhood into one of authoritative service. This was not a defeat or a consignment to a shadowy exile, but a promotion to a critical, sovereign position within the cosmic hierarchy. His transformation represented the ultimate maturation, a move from ruling the temporary sunlit world to governing the eternal foundational reality of what comes after. He became the first king of the afterlife, a precedent that would forever shape Egyptian understanding of death, not as an end, but as a transition to a different form of order. His spirit would forever watch over Egypt, not from the palace at Thebes, but from the enduring throne of the underworld. The conception of Horus represented a profound act of renewal on both a personal and political level, intertwining Isis's emotional need for connection with Osiris's legacy and the broader necessity of securing Egypt's future stability. This union occurred in the unique context of Osiris's transition to his new role as ruler of the underworld, placing the event not within the realm of ordinary life, but within a sacred space between worlds, where farewell and genesis became one. This delicate balance of earthly lineage and divine purpose framed the conception as both a personal solace and a strategic dynastic maneuver, ensuring that the legacy of the murdered king would persist beyond the confines of his physical death. In a final tender embrace before his departure to assume sovereignty over the Duat, Osiris and Isis conceived their son. This moment was far more than an emotional parting. It was an act of deliberate creation, a promise forged from love and loss that fundamentally established the principle of cyclical return within Egyptian cosmology. Osiris assured Isis that their son would grow to become a great protector of the Egyptian people, destined to confront Set and restore the divine balance that had been shattered. This prophetic promise ensured that Osiris's influence would continue, not through his own return to the living world, but through a dedicated offspring, demonstrating that justice often unfolds across generations. Horus, as their divine son, embodied the reconciliation of powerful opposing forces. He represented the merging of his father's underworld authority with his mother's earthly magic and devotion, a unification of solar and chthonic energies. His very existence testified to the idea that life insists on continuing after death, that new purpose can be born from the deepest separation. The promise he carried was dual in nature, containing both the future vengeance against his father's murderer and the ultimate restoration of Maat, the principle of cosmic order, to the Egyptian throne. This method of conception demonstrated a remarkable and innovative adaptation to irreversible circumstances. Unable to reverse the past, Isis and Osiris instead channeled their power into creating a new future. The pregnancy itself became a protective measure for the nation, a living, growing assurance during the dark years of Set's tyranny that a rightful heir existed and would one day challenge the usurper. The unborn Horus was a symbol of imminent justice, his anticipated birth a source of hope that sustained the people and the principles his father had established. This development effectively transformed a story of profound personal loss into one of enduring dynastic hope. The personal tragedy of Osiris's murder and his subsequent reign in the land of the dead was not an end, but a catalyst for a new beginning. The legacy was no longer rooted in a lost past, but was now carried forward in the potential of the future king. Horus was the living answer to Set's brutality, proof that a violent act of chaos could be met with a creative act of order, ensuring that the rightful royal line and the divine mandate to rule would continue. His conception was the critical pivot point, turning a narrative of death and fragmentation into one of cyclical return and eventual victory. The reassembly of Osiris was a profound symbolic achievement that reached far beyond the mere physical rejoining of flesh and bone. It represented a grand act of cosmic repair, a deliberate methodology for restoring Maat to a world that had been thrown into spiritual disarray. Each fragment that was located, carefully recovered, and ritually cleansed was not just a piece of a body, but a tangible victory in a larger battle against the encroaching forces of chaos. The process itself, this patient and meticulous gathering, became a powerful model for how balanced, careful action can redress even the most violent of imbalances, demonstrating that order can be methodically rebuilt piece by piece through devotion and systematic effort. The eventual resolution provided by Osiris's new role in the underworld offered a mature understanding of cosmic balance, one that did not seek the annihilation of opposing forces, but rather acknowledged their necessary and ongoing tension. True equilibrium, this story suggests, is not a final state of peace where conflict is eradicated, but a dynamic and managed coexistence achieved through the acceptance of complexity and the integration of difficult truths. The outcome demonstrates a core principle of Egyptian thought, that order is not a permanent, self-sustaining condition, but a state that requires continuous, conscious maintenance against the ever-present pull of entropy. This entire epic proved, in the most dramatic terms, that fragmentation is not a permanent condition. It showed that what has been shattered can be made whole again, though perhaps in a new configuration and for a new purpose. The very existence of a restored Osiris, now ruling a different kingdom, offered a template of hope for addressing other cosmic and personal imbalances, suggesting that no collapse is so total that it cannot be answered with a corresponding act of reconstruction. The narrative itself became a durable archetype, a foundational story for understanding the universal human experience of struggle, loss, and the possibility of a meaningful, though transformed, renewal. We see in this final act not a simple return to a previous state, but the establishment of a more complex and resilient form of order. The cosmos, like the body of the god, had been dismembered and then reassembled, and in that process, it gained a deeper capacity to withstand future challenges. The repair was not a perfect erasure of the damage, but a mending that incorporated the memory of the break, making the whole stronger for having been broken and carefully put back together. This is the ultimate lesson of the Osiris myth. That wholeness after trauma is not about forgetting the fracture, but about integrating its reality into a new, more conscious state of being, creating a balance that understands the darkness it contains. Osiris's influence extended well beyond the moment of his physical reassembly, permeating the very foundations of Egyptian civilization and thought. His narrative ceased to be merely the story of a single god, and became instead a fundamental principle woven into the agricultural cycles that defined life along the Nile. His death and resurrection were seen as the divine analogue to the annual cycle of the river Is inundation, the planting of seeds in the nourishing black soil, and the eventual harvest. The land's death in the dry season and its rebirth with the floodwaters became a yearly reenactment of his story, a testament to how myth can provide structure and meaning to the most basic human experiences of nature. This foundational myth provided the complete theological and ritual framework for Egyptian funerary practices for the next 3 millennia. The meticulous process of mummification was a direct imitation of the linen-wrapped reassembly performed by Isis and Anubis. The elaborate spells recited during the funeral, collected in texts like the Pyramid texts and later the Book of the Dead, were designed to guide the deceased through the underworld, mirroring Osiris' own journey and culminating in the hope of a similar favorable judgment before his throne. His story provided the archetype for every Egyptian's greatest hope, that death was not an end but a transition to a new, ordered existence. Through this, his legacy demonstrated a profound philosophical truth, that patient, systematic devotion ultimately outlasts even the most brutal acts of violence. Set's act of dismemberment was a singular event of spectacular destruction, but it was met with a response of painstaking, persistent reconstruction. This contrast established a powerful model for understanding how to confront chaos, not with equal force, but with a determined, step-by-step process of reclamation. It became a lesson in the power of incremental effort over explosive action. His subsequent eternal role as the just ruler of the afterlife provided immeasurable comfort to generations of Egyptians. It transformed the underworld from a terrifying, uncertain void into a structured kingdom with a familiar, empathetic judge. Knowing that a god who had himself suffered a brutal and unjust death would preside over their own judgment offered a profound sense of fairness and hope, making the inevitability of death less a thing to be feared and more a passage to be prepared for with ritual and morality. The story thus offered a durable cultural template for dealing with any form of profound personal or collective loss, providing a narrative that acknowledged the reality of fragmentation while insisting on the possibility of a reassembled, though transformed, wholeness. On a cosmic scale, his continued presence as a stabilizing force in the Duat created a permanent counterbalance to his brother Set's destructive and chaotic tendencies, ensuring that neither force could ever achieve total victory and that the universe would remain in a dynamic, managed equilibrium. This resolution shows us that the most important victories are not always physical or political, but are often philosophical and spiritual. Osiris did not reclaim his earthly throne, but he achieved a far more enduring form of sovereignty. His legacy, therefore, is not one of a kingdom won back, but of a principle made manifest. That systematic, devoted effort is the most powerful tool for creating change that truly lasts, weaving itself into the fabric of a culture's identity and offering a path through the darkness of loss toward a renewed sense of order. His story endures not as a record of a battle, but as a quiet testament to the power of relentless care. Isis's methodology, transforming profound grief into a structured forensic investigation, provides an enduring template for confronting chaos. Her approach demonstrates that even the most brutal act of fragmentation can be met not with despair, but with a step-by-step process of meticulous reconstruction. The story reminds us that seemingly insurmountable challenges are often best addressed by combining deep emotional resolve with systematic, focused effort. Consider how your own obstacles might be met with a similar balance, honoring the depth of your feeling while applying a clear, determined strategy to reassemble what has been broken.